and I call the member for Cook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, Labor has given a tax cut to help with the cost of living crisis that they have created, with a reckless approach to spending that's fuelled inflation. Across the last three budgets, Labor has committed an additional $315 billion in inflationary spending, an extra $315 billion. This accounts for almost $30,000 per household. And I'd ask the average Australian household out there, do they feel $30,000 better off thanks to Labor's spending? Last week, core inflation has risen to 4.4% and has increased for 4 months in a row. And when inflation's rising, one thing can be sure. Interest rates are not going down, and Australian households are getting heaped and heaped and heaped with more weight to where they're almost about to collapse. Since the election, real disposable income is down 7.8%. We've locked in bad workplace laws that are driving up the cost of doing business, and this is being passed on to the consumer as the cost of living increases. Families are now being slugged with higher tax. Labor is banking $60 billion of bracket creep and increasing personal income tax by 20% since the election. Now, BetaShares chief economist described the latest consumer price report as a shocker, saying it places huge pressure on the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates in August. So what we have here is a reckless Labor government with their budget increasing the probability that Australian households, Australian families will be slugged with higher interest rates and more pain. Now, families are hurting because the price of basic necessities are going up. Food is up 11.4%, housing 14%, rents 14%, electricity 21%, gas 22%. But what do these numbers mean? That means every time you pay a gas bill, it'll double every 3 years. That's what 22% per annum means. Every 3 years, your gas bill is doubling. Every 3 years, your electricity bill is doubling. And Australian families have had enough and they can't take it. And it is not just a global phenomenon. You see, core inflation in Australia is high and rising. It's higher than Sweden, it's higher than the UK, it's higher than Norway, it's higher than Canada, it's higher than our neighbours in New Zealand, it's higher than the rest of the euro area, it's higher than the US, and it's higher than Switzerland. In stark contrast to Australia, all of those countries I just mentioned, inflation is now falling. So this Labor government has put the Reserve Bank between a rock and a hard place. Australian families are breaking, they're under pressure. Everywhere else in the world, inflation is falling, yet they're left with the impossible task of trying to get this narrow landing without crashing the economy because of this irresponsible Labor government and spending. Now, this government for the last 2 years has been completely distracted with the wrong priorities. They could have started from day one with a focus on cost of living. Instead, they were focused on divisive social policies. Now, no matter how much money the government tries to spend or to spin this, from the data, this is a homegrown inflation crisis. Now is time for the government to rein in its irresponsible spending, to adjust their budget and deal with the problem so Australians aren't burdened further by their mismanagement of the economy and the country. Tight monetary policy is being undermined by Labor's loose fiscal policy. If interest rates rise between now and the end of this year, it'll be on the government's head. Dr Chalmers needs to stand before the Australian public and admit this Labor government is the reason inflation is out of control. Now, in stark contrast to this irresponsible Labor government approach, the opposition and the Leader of the opposition have stated how they will rein in inflationary spending and take pressure off Australians, take pressure off Australian households and take pressure off interest rates and their mortgages. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.